Welcome back to Dragon Ball Dissection December. And look at that! Part 11 is up on December 11th. It's almost like I planned it that way. I didn't. I really didn't. You give me too much credit, I'm a mess. We've now come to the part of the story featuring a lot of non-stop fighting. As with the previous two arcs where following the fights chronologically is both tedious and unhelpful, I'll instead give a quick summary to set the stage and then move on to topics I want to talk about. Piccolo and number 17 fight for a while, with Piccolo managing to hold his own much better than he had before. However, the single key disruption alerts Cell, and he soon arrives to absorb number 17 and number 18. Having become much stronger after absorbing so many people, Cell quickly takes out Piccolo. But then number 16 steps into an active role, proving himself a match for Cell, until Cell absorbs number 17. But then Tien arrives, spamming his Shinki Goho to keep Cell at bay, while number 18 escapes with the damage number 16. Once Tien body gives out and Goku arrives just long enough to collect him and Piccolo, Cell goes about destroying nearby islands in an attempt to flush out his prey. But then Vegeta and Trunks arrive. Vegeta powers up into his beefier, surpassing Super Saiyan form and smacks Cell around, until Cell convinces Vegeta to let him absorb number 18 to give Vegeta a greater challenge. Meanwhile, Bluma has given Kuririn a remote that will shut down the artificial humans. However, he cannot bring himself to destroy number 18 and instead smashes the controller. With all of his obstacles out of the way, Cell absorbs number 18. That's quite a lot happening, but I'm sure you can pick out the one common element. If you've been around for a little while, you might even be thinking the same term I am. Cell tennis. Piccolo matches number 17, and then Cell overpowers Piccolo, and then number 16 overpowers Cell, and then Cell overpowers number 16, and then Vegeta overpowers Cell. And I needn't tell you the trend continues past this episode, so that Cell overpowers Vegeta. I won't waste your time doling out the same analysis I gave to the fight against Freeza, so I'll just once again say, I'm disappointed by the extreme overuse of ultimate power-ups rendered useless in a matter of minutes by constant one-upmanship. However, one element does bear repeating because it's frankly insane that it happened a second time. Piccolo is once again completely wasted by this tennis match. He goes from the strongest character in the series to absolutely useless over the span of a mere 10 chapters, and in this case, that's the end for him. He's done fighting. His painful case of green balls strikes again. That legendary power-up, the source of so much angst and hand-wringing, ultimately amounts to practically nothing. His presence convinces Cell to dump exposition, which was a narrative mistake. That knowledge does result in the creation of the emergency shutdown controller, which, as I just said, is ultimately never used. And his one fight going all out against number 17 accomplishes nothing but alerting Cell, which makes the situation far, far worse. Oh, and now we don't have Dragon Balls anymore either. Good job. But the information from Cell was used to kill a threat decades away from completion, so at least there is that. And don't mistake me here, I'm not complaining about what Piccolo did. He was in a situation with little alternative. The artificial humans came to him, leaving him no choice but to fight. And he gambled, hoping he could take one of them out. I suppose maybe he could have tried to let them know a creature was coming after them in order to stop them from fighting, especially since part of him is now the guy who wasn't convinced the artificial humans were all bad, but I'll let that pass. There's no reason to think they'd believe him or stop their hunt for Goku. What I'm complaining about is the writing and how, once again, major plot developments have no real payoff. Instead, they're letdowns because they're only introduced to serve as rungs on this never-ending ladder of escalation in order to facilitate fake drama. But just because Piccolo went off on his own doesn't mean the other warriors don't have roles as well. They're standing outside of Kame House trying their best to follow the action. Well, most of them are. I guess Yamcha went to the bathroom or something because he flat out disappears after Piccolo leaves. Poor dolt. And then there's this unintentionally hilarious bit of timing. Kuririn and Tien Shinhan sense that Cell is on the way. They are filled with absolute terror at this disastrous development. Literally the very next panel, Chi-Chi bursts out of the house to say, "Hey, Bluma's on the phone, she's created a device to render the enemies powerless." I know what the story's going for, that this vital element has been finished just in the nick of time. If only it can be delivered, they might have a chance. But it's just the way the two components are juxtaposed. Tien Shinhan in a moment of crisis so heavy, it warrants the wavy lines of doom. And Chi-Chi right behind him, waving the phone, going, "No, it's okay, guys. The answer to all our problems is right here. You just gotta push the button." Oh. Well, that's good. Never mind then. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. What really does work about this section, though, is how fully and abruptly allegiances shift. There's no time for hand-wringing on the moral quandaries of allying with monsters. It's all very pragmatic. Piccolo, Tien Shinhan, Kuririn all shift to the side of the artificial humans, the former too willing to sacrifice themselves to keep their foes out of Cell's hands. It almost makes me wish they had managed to defeat Cell in this skirmish, just to see how the characters would have handled themselves once the enemy of my enemy situation had passed, especially if the controller had been left intact. Number 16 in particular gets to shine during this section, with a fun skill set that draws on his robotic nature, including an imperviousness to being absorbed by Cell. It really shouldn't come as any kind of surprise that the artificial human whose talents have been held back until now is stronger than his two friends. Of course, like Piccolo, he is merely a speed bump on the way to Cell's victory, so very little of what he does amounts to anything. But he does have the extremely bright idea of ripping Cell's tail off so he can no longer absorb anybody. Too bad Piccolo clued Cell into the fact that he can regenerate, proving once again just how useful Piccolo assimilating God ultimately was. But the absolute best part of number 16 taking on Cell is that it opens with the greatest title page Toriyama has ever drawn. Yes, bask in its awesomeness. Cell, obviously, manages to get his tail on number 17. And while part of me wishes he absorbed the artificial humans the same way he absorbs other people because of how absolutely sickening it is, I have to admit in some way the whole swallowed by a python gimmick is unsettling in its own way. So Cell transforms into his second form. I hate it. I think it's one of Toriyama's ugliest designs, with its flat nose, bulbous lips, and smug-looking eyes. And yet for some reason, Toriyama liked it quite a bit. I, however, quite agree with his editor, Kondo Yu, who said, and I quote, "But he really did look like a moron." Yeah, he does. However, I'm torn. Due to Kondo's dislike, Toriyama said he had no choice but to rush through second form Cell in order to get to his cool-looking perfect form. So it does make me wonder if we would have gotten more story and more intrigue if second form Cell had stayed around a little while longer. Maybe number 18 would have gotten away for a while, and her and number 16's new knowledge of Cell's existence would have changed the dynamic. And maybe we wouldn't have spent so much time on these boring-ass islands playing boring-ass power-up tennis. That would have made second form Cell worth it as far as I'm concerned. But as it stands, the only time I like second form Cell's face is when number 16 punches it to no effect. He actually looks genuinely funny there. Tien Shinhan engages in perhaps his most iconic moment here. For me, it's certainly one of the high points of Endless Island Adventure. He looks down on the scene, recognizing how hopeless it has become now that Cell is transforming, and he apologizes to Chiaotzu that he's probably going to die. Then, using his Shinkikoho, he pummels Cell into the ground repeatedly for as long as he can. It's not enough to truly harm Cell, but it does hold him in place. It is disappointing that Tien Shinhan's uber-powerful suicide move has become the only tool in his arsenal that allows him to be useful, which means he has become so outclassed he couldn't possibly face any of these adversaries in a straight fight. However, it does kind of break the tennis problem. I find it far more compelling watching someone who knows he has no real chance willingly head into lethal danger just to stall a villain in the hopes that his sacrifice will be enough, than to sit through a bunch of characters in an extended dick measuring contest to see whose transformation is more satisfying. There's real emotion here, real tension. And while Ten Shinhan sometimes gets excluded from chapter title pages and has no real character development to speak of, at least he gets one important moment to shine. Once Bluma delivers the remote to Kuririn, she mentions she created new battle jackets for the others to wear, and this time the little boot stripes that featured so briefly in the Freeza arc are here to stay. Kuririn directs her to the Heavenly Realm as that's where Goku and the others are. And so, she just flies her ship there. Why don't we use a rocket? Silly fat man, a rocket would just be repelled. You need to be vetted by me and possess a magical compliant rod and a special bell as a token of worthiness. Screw your stupid religion, I have technology, bye! Needless to say, it has always bugged me that the security of God's temple, which was once built up as this mystical, impenetrable secret, can now be breached by Amazon's free 2-day shipping. I'm okay with people who are invited or expected being able to return whenever they want, but this is just stupid. The only reason I will accept this nonsense at all in this one case is because there is currently no God minding the store. I can convince myself that the protections are dependent on God's powers, and that if this had been attempted at any other time, it would have resulted in Bluma going splat and plummeting headfirst onto Upa and Bora's teepee. And now of course we get to the "you done goofed" section of the story. Vegeta and Trunks arrive on the scene to challenge Cell. Well, Vegeta arrives to challenge Cell. Daddy brings Junior along to impress him by beating someone up. And beat someone up he does. Vegeta is absolutely brutal here, and since Cell's design makes me irrationally angry, I'm okay with seeing him get roughed up. As Trunks had said upon exiting the Room of Spirit and Time, Vegeta surpassed Super Saiyan within a couple of months, resulting in this extra beefy form which he calls, amusingly enough, Super Vegeta, although he's about as far away from a superhero as you could get. Vegeta isn't nearly as tiny as he used to be drawn, but while it's cool, it still looks a bit silly on someone so short. Just try to imagine those muscles on Saiyan-Orc Vegeta. Actually, you don't have to imagine. Here! The construction of the story becomes rather brilliant here, how it intersperses the two plot lines of Vegeta and Kuririn simultaneously. They run completely parallel but independently, so that as Kuririn makes his decision, he doesn't know that he's facilitating Vegeta's decision to doom them all. It really ratchets up the tension. And after all the bizarre, inconsistent motivations that have plagued this arc so far, it is extraordinarily refreshing to see characters making poor decisions that feel both natural and well plotted. I'm going to talk about both of these characters and their actions in detail, but for now, let's focus on Kuririn. Kuririn gets a bird's eye view of the fight, seeing Vegeta beating the crap out of Cell, but also noticing the artificial humans hiding close by. He descends as he has to be within 10 meters for the remote control to work. However, this 31-year-old man is so smitten by artificial human number 18 after that one peck on the cheek she gave him, that he cannot bring himself to push a single button. In fact, he makes his presence known and flat out destroys the controller. Toriyama can't write romance to save his life. Kuririn is a dumbass. That's probably what you're expecting me to say, isn't it? And I don't necessarily disagree with any of those points. There is definitely plenty of stupidity to go around. However, I am actually going to spend some time defending this. From my own ethical perspective, I feel I would have a difficult time rationalizing rendering a person helpless and then killing that person. While I'd find it perfectly justifiable in a combat situation, I personally still don't know if I'd be able to do it even then. But given a situation where that person is completely unaware and hiding for her life, a person who we haven't seen directly harm anybody but Vegeta, I'd have a hard time justifying such an action, even if it is the pragmatic thing to do. In general, I have an easier time overlooking pragmatically questionable actions if they're done to save lives. But let's look at the pragmatic issue. Taking ethics out of the question and looking at it from a purely logical standpoint, there is a case to be made that the killing of one person, even if that person is totally innocent, is better than potentially allowing millions to die. It may be morally repugnant, but it could be argued it's the correct thing to do. So what about that? Well, quite frankly, while Kuririn destroying number 18 would most likely solve the issue permanently, in actuality, there is no real need for her to be disposed of to keep Cell from absorbing her. Remember that aside from Cell, the artificial humans don't have ki. The only reason Cell is here in the first place is because he sensed Piccolo fighting number 17. If number 18 went into hiding and didn't get into fights, Cell would never, ever be able to find her. Just like how I agreed with Goku that murdering Dr. Gero wouldn't be a good solution, but suggested that they could warn him that they know what he's doing, this is likewise the perfect time to parlay. Number 16 and number 18 now unquestionably realize it's in their best interest to lay low until Cell is gone. And because of the remote, Kuririn comes to the negotiating table from a position of strength, just in case she might be inclined to misbehave after Cell is taken care of. And remember that Kuririn had a better view of what was going on than anybody. Cell was at Vegeta's mercy. Trunks hadn't even needed to step in yet. This should have been over. So given the situation at this point, I don't see any need for the controller to be used. Vegeta's decision to go rogue is what threw a monkey wrench into everything. All that said, I have to be fair and ask myself the all-important question. If number 18 had been absorbed first, if Kuririn was sneaking up behind number 16 and number 17, would he have had this ethical dilemma? And I'm forced to admit that it seems much less likely. Kuririn is clearly mooning over the hot fembot who kissed him on the cheek, which makes it seem less of a decision of compassion and more... yeah. And since Toriyama does suck at writing romance, while that moment is cute, it doesn't feel nearly enough to justify this action if it's based on... that. Instead of showing them mercy. And there was absolutely no good reason for Kuririn to do something as dramatic as smashing the controller. Might as well keep it just in case you're wrong about her and she decides to kill you. Even number 18 questions why he would do that. But don't think I'm letting her off the hook either. Number 17 got absorbed because he mistakenly believed the fight was over and let down his guard. I get why she stayed put when Cell was blowing up islands, but his attention is thoroughly given over to Vegeta. Again, she has no key. She could escape with number 16 and no one would ever notice. But instead, she just has to stay and rubberneck for no good reason, clearly having learned nothing from what happened to number 17. However, the real screw-up here is Vegeta, who not only doesn't help anything, but actively makes the situation worse, allying himself with the villain and once again beating up his own son when he tries to prevent stupidity. There is plenty of blame to spread, better decisions could have been made by all parties, but without Vegeta's little boo-boo, none of the other mistakes would have mattered in the slightest. So Cell absorbs number 18, and the best thing I can say about that is that at least he won't look nearly as stupid from now on. We'll be checking back in with Vegeta when we return to the Cell arc on Christmas Day in 2 weeks, but in the meantime, stop by next week as we'll be taking a detour. With most of the artificial humans out of commission, we need replacements, and the 7th Dragon Ball Z movie happens to have 3 of them. They'll do, I guess. That's right, it's Extreme Battle, the 3 Great Super Saiyans.